Hi everybody, welcome back to the Renaissance Woodworker. I'm your host, Shannon Rogers, and this is my shop. So believe it or not, another year has gone by and it's Safety Week, Wood Safety Day. Woodworker Safety Day. That sounds really weird to say Safety Day, but let's be honest, we've covered a lot of material since 2009. And thanks to Mark Spagnolo for kicking this whole thing off and the woodworking blogging community, we have a sizable archive of safety tips that are compiled all over the web. And if you look at the bottom of this post, you'll see a link to what I call my safety page, which has all of the safety posts, videos that I've done since I started this blog. Not just during Safety Week, but just little things that have cropped up while I've been building projects. So if you're looking for some additional safety tips, check out the link below. So as I was struggling to come up with a topic to talk about this year, I always go back to the well of experience. And have I hurt myself in the past year? You know, God only knows, we hope the answer is no, but invariably little things pop up, little bumps, bruises, injuries, splinters, things like that will show up throughout the year. And it's these incidences, no matter how minor, that will really help us gain a better understanding of how to improve our working habits. And the biggest injury that I encountered this year was actually relatively recent. And I ended up pinching a nerve in my back that had me flat on my back for almost 2 weeks, unable to work in the shop, which, you know, it's really frustrating for me because this is a release for me to come in here and kind of blow off the steam. I discovered that that pinched nerve was mainly just a repetitive stress injury. It was working without proper attention to posture and to overreaching and just overdoing it. And I think you'll find the more you work in the shop, the more you're kind of lazy about some of these basic things like posture and using the right muscles, the more you're going to have problems. And I get emails all the time from guys that say they used to be able to do something. I remember when I was able to fill in the blank in the shop, and invariably they're not able to do it anymore because of just inattention to detail over the years. They've developed a wood dust allergy because they didn't work in proper ventilation. They've developed a more serious allergy because they didn't work in proper ventilation while using, you know, caustic finishes and things like that. So today I'm going to talk about these long-term injuries, the ones that we just don't even think about because, hey, we're all immortal, right? Well, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I still want to be working in my shop and I want to be healthy enough to do it. So let's take a look at a few things that aren't nearly as flashy as, you know, fixed with a Band-Aid or a bandage or stitches or anything like that, which means it's things that we forget about and things that can come back to bite us 10, 20 years down the road. Let's start with probably one of the more obvious things, working with chemicals. Now, from a fire safety perspective, you want to store your finishes in a fireproof cabinet or, worst case scenario, some sort of metal cabinet. And this is just a metal kind of storage cabinet I got in an office supply store, and it has everything from, you know, boiled linseed oil to mineral spirits to my armor seal. I've got all of my shellac, some spray finishes and things, as well as my spray finisher. Anything to do with finishing is in this cabinet. And when I'm not using it, I can of course close it up and keep it in there, keep it out of the way of things, and the potential for fire is much lower because it's inside this metal cabinet. That's great. That's the obvious thing. When we take it out and we begin to use the finish in my garage, or many of you in basement workshops and things, it's imperative that you have proper ventilation. You can put on a respirator, that's one way to do it, but once you take the respirator off and you leave the shop, what's to say that some of those vapors and some of those fumes haven't made it into the rest of the house? Unless you're in a completely self-standing shop, there's always the chance that that could happen. So you want to move your finishing outside. You want to make sure that you've got plenty of windows open, you've got air moving. Probably one of the best things you can do, certainly, is to wear that respirator, but then to make sure you flushed any of those vapors and chemicals out of the air once you're done. Of course, the other thing to think about is using a finish that's completely non-toxic. It's one of the reasons I like shellac so much. There's nothing in shellac that can harm me. In fact, shellac is used to coat mini pharmaceuticals, candies, things like that. If I can eat candy, the candy itself is probably worse for me than the shellac coating that's around the top of it. So think about those finishes you use. While we're on the topic of air quality, an air filtration system is imperative, I think, in a hand tool shop. I have a jet air filter that's just hanging on the wall over there. This little remote control can turn the thing on. And in my small shop, I've, 22 by 13, I can circulate the air. If I turn this thing on high, it will circulate all the air in the shop about once every 8 minutes. And you may be thinking, well, you're in a hand tool shop, you're not kicking up that much dust. There's where you're wrong. I never really thought about it. Certainly hand tools create dust, but it's the bigger stuff. It's more particulate and it falls straight to the floor. It's not the really fine carcinogenic stuff that everybody's always worried about. However, walk into any hand tool only shop and do the white glove test on any surface, and it's going to come up really, really dusty. And this was really made apparent to me when I went down to the Woodwright School, Roy Underhill School. Well, obviously there's no power tools being used there, and Roy had been in operation, I think, about 3 years when I went down there, and there was dust on everything. There's a lot of kind of antiques and artifacts that he's got for decoration on the wall, that tools that don't really get used, and there was, a visible, probably 16th inch layer of wood dust. So it's going somewhere. It's ending up in the air and it's settling on your tools. For that matter, if it's on the tools, if you get breezes in here from an air filtration unit or opening windows while you're ventilating for that finishing, it's going to kick up some of that dust. Not only is the dust going to get on your drying finish, but it's going to end up in your lungs. And while it may not be the really, really dangerous fine stuff, you can develop a wood dust allergy. If you've ever come out of the shop after a day working, and maybe the next day you've got kind of a stuffy nose or a little bit of a sinus headache, that's a reaction to the wood dust. And if you're in that environment a couple days a week for 30 years, that's going to be a problem. It's going to cause respiration issues. So get yourself an air filtration unit. Flip it on every, for 10 minutes every hour you're in the shop, just to keep the air moving, keep things flowing. When at all possible, if you're in a garage or something, open the doors. The beautiful thing is if it's cold outside and you're working by hand, you can keep yourself warm just by working. One of the big things for me is the floors. I always have anti-fatigue mats scattered around my shop. I've got a big one here in the front of the bench, and I've got an identical one on the other side of the bench because I work kind of 360 degrees around my bench all the time. I've also got a smaller, much thicker mat that I move around from station to station. If I'm over here at the sharpening station, I'll drop it down on the floor in front of it, and it's really soft and cushy, and it's great for when you're standing still for a long period of time. If I'm working at the lathe, I'll drop it in front of the lathe. If I move over to my joinery bench, I'll drop it in front of the joinery bench. Ideally I'd have one in front of each station, but my shop's too small to have all these different mats, and they get in the way when I'm trying to move lighting around for getting a shot. So one mat is good. Just remember to move it over there. Even though the slightest amount of time at the joinery bench seems to go from 5 minutes into suddenly 20 minutes. And if I'm standing on the hard concrete floor, that really wears on you. Good footwear is a good way to go. I've worn work boots before, and I've actually ended up settling on these Crocs. They're actually recommended to me by a doctor. And if you look at nurses who spend a lot of time on hard linoleum floors all day long, they wear these things. They may not have kind of steel-toed protection, but they definitely provide the cushioning I need. And if you've ever spent a full day in the shop and you felt that kind of ache deep in your bones the next day, imagine what that's doing to your joints, to your knees, your back. Just the tension that results from those sore muscles can really build up and cause issues over the long haul. And of course, let's just not forget the common sense things. Have a seat once in a while. Hop up on your bench. Or got this nice sawing bench over here, and people always joke that the sawing bench doubles as a great place to eat your lunch. Well, have a seat once in a while. Take the load off. Saw bench makes a great place to chop out mortises or to bore a hole. You can sit down and anchor the work just by sitting on it, and you've got the proper body positioning to do tasks like that. So take advantage of it and sit down whenever possible. So while I'm over here at the saw bench, let's talk a little bit about some of the activities that we do in our shops that can really wear us out. Sawing can be relatively strenuous, especially if you're doing a lot of it. And good technique will really help you kind of save your back, save your shoulders, but you want to have the appropriate work surface to work on. A saw bench is set so that it comes right to knee height. That's not just an arbitrary thing. It positions your body in such a way for the optimum body mechanics, the most ergonomic body position. But when we get into sawing, we can kind of get tensed up and we hunch ourselves over a little bit. It will not only throw your cut off, but it's gonna really wear on your back and your shoulders and get you really, really tense. Imagine repeating that for years and years. It's never a good idea. When you're sawing, you want to use the bench height properly. Keep a nice straight back and good posture throughout. Good posture will also make sure that your sawing arm is able to work freely, which is going to give you a nice straight cut. You'll find that if you've got your body positioned properly with a nice straight back and well supported in the core, that your lower back takes much less wear. If you finish the day less tired and less just kind of bone weary, how much longer you'll be able to do this into the future. Now, one little thing about sawing. When you work with a handsaw, you obviously are pushing down and you get a lot of splintering along the bottom edge of the cut. I tend to, when I finish a cut, I'll pick the board up and kind of tap it on the bench and it just shakes the sawdust off. Then I'll pick it up and I'll reach down here and grab the board. Well, I'm immediately putting my hand right into a whole bunch of splinters. Now, this is relatively soft basswood, it's not that big of a deal. But there are a lot of species out there that have really very hard, very strong, and very sharp splinters. I know, splinters, wham. Well, here's the thing, talking about long-term injuries. When you get a splinter in your hand or anywhere, you want to get it out as soon as you can. You don't know how your body is going to react to that particular wood species. I know walnut is particularly nasty for a lot of people, myself included. A walnut splinter will get infected very, very quickly, and the area around it becomes swollen, becomes very painful, and you need to pull that splinter out right away. Well, the other thing is the scar tissue will develop around that splinter. The longer you leave it in there, the more scar tissue is going to build up. Considering we most of the time get splinters in our hands where there's not a lot of meat around the fingers, that scar tissue can cause real debilitating problems and arthritis further on down the road. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, but there's quite a few medical doctors that read this blog. So please pipe up. But I've heard my share of stories from guys around the lumberyard where I work that let a splinter go for a long time and it's caused them real problems 10 years down the road. So just one of those little things. This is where I get the most splinters when I come away from a fresh saw cut. If you get one, pull it out right away. And even if it means you got to do a little bit of surgery and kind of dig around to get it out, it's better to get that foreign body out of there sooner rather than later. Hand planing like sawing requires good posture, but now there's a lot more effort that needs to be placed on using your core and your legs to propel the plane. I'm real guilty of this, and I'm pretty certain this is how I hurt my back. I'm usually trying to kind of confine myself into a small area because I'm trying to get a specific shot in a frame. So I'll kind of plant my feet and I'll extend my body out. And you can see how straight my arms are, and more importantly, how much strain I'm putting on my back by keeping my feet stationary. Ultimately, what I want to do is I'm planing left-handed, so my left leg is back. If you were planing right-handed, your right leg would be back. I want to take my left leg, instead of it being so far back, I actually want to step up a little bit. So I kind of cock the plane in, right up against my hip. What this does is it pulls my center of gravity further forward. Then with my other leg, I can step and plane. And that entire stroke you saw the plane really never left my side, maybe went out about this far. Suddenly that transfers all that work from your lower back and your shoulders right into the core, your abs, and into your legs and butt, really. So rather than, you hear a lot of people say you want to step forward in plane. Well, what happens there is this leg is still too far back and you end up kind of going into a deep knee bend, and that's just not necessary, and it's kind of awkward. Step forward with your kind of off foot first and pull that in, and I like the term cock that plane in, then step, and you'll feel the difference. Instead of this where it's all in my shoulders and I'm gonna wear out my back real fast, I'm stepping forward and cocking it in, and I'm doing all of the work with my core and my legs at that point. You know, one other thing I should mention while we're here and we're edge planing is, beyond the posture thing, you find yourself joining edges a lot. So I'm often grabbing the plane like this and dragging my knuckles along the edge. Well, in this instance, I've got a rough sawn board here, so my knuckles are dragging along a very splintery surface, going back to those splinters again. Likewise, this freshly jointed edge is razor sharp. And as you bring the plane back, your knuckles can kind of drag along that. You can slice them open really bad. Now that's obviously not a long-term injury, but it's something that can draw a lot of blood really, really quickly. Goes back to having that first aid kit in the shop all the time. Where you really get in trouble is when you're working on a surface, like say you're traversing a board, and you don't have the ability to kind of walk alongside it. Because imagine, you know, this is a relatively short board. If I had an 8-foot board and I had to walk with it all the way down the bench, cocking that in and walking really makes it very efficient. Now, if I'm traversing the board and I'm working straight across, I don't have the leisure of walking alongside of it. And now is when you really find yourself kind of extending out over it, especially if you're working with a large board. And I just ran into this as I was planing a 22-inch wide tabletop. You know, my bench is only 24 inches wide, and I'm constantly stretching way out over the edge. And that is going to really tire your back fast. The idea here, I will actually take a leg and step up onto the bench, or I have a shelf here. If you don't have a shelf, you can actually step in between the stretchers, and you kind of hook your knee under the bench. Then I can work across. My body, the center of gravity is further forward. I can work across, but I also can kind of push up with my knee on the bench top, and that engages my abs, it engages my core, and it doesn't leave my back kind of out to dry. Anytime I'm working on a task that requires me to stand still for a long period of time, all of these techniques kind of need to be blended into one. I've got an anti-fatigue mat below my feet. I'm constantly conscious of my stance and a nice upright posture. I also try to remember to kind of bend my knees from time to time. You can see a little bit of the boom light I have in the shot here. I kind of did that on purpose because proper lighting is huge. Poor lighting causes eye strain, which of course can, you know, do things to your eyesight over time. But for me, it causes headaches. And you can imagine constantly straining your eyes like that. That's going to cause problems over the long haul. The other thing, and I find this with carving a lot, certainly elevating the work to keep that posture is a big deal. But I also try to use a mallet as much as I can. When I get into kind of detail things like this Queen Anne fan, you tend to want to stay away from the mallet and kind of muscle your way through everything. Well, you're incurring excess stress. You're having to kind of push a lot harder, and because you may be worried about screwing up, you're tensing up all the way through your shoulders and through your wrists and everything. Using the mallet will allow you to take a simple V-cut and make it with a lot less effort on your part. And you can continue to be relaxed throughout the cut. The other thing when you're carving is you always want to keep the meat, the heel of your hand on the work itself. So now, instead of having to kind of hold it up, hold the chisel up off the work, or maybe push back in opposition to the mallet or your pushing hand to keep it in control, your hand is firmly planted and you're letting gravity do the work for you here. And it just ends up being much less stress on your body. Another thing I find particularly useful, and one of the reasons I like kind of carving at this bench over here, is I have this long cabinet behind me. I can actually lean against that and kind of take a load off, if you will, and it gives me even just a little bit more leverage to do my work. Of course, speaking of long haul, the biggest offender when it comes to hurting ourselves and causing splinters and hurting our back is the material we actually work with. Working in a lumber yard, I can tell you I have hurt my back, hurt my hand, I've put splinters all over myself, I've dinged up my shins really bad walking in a lumber. This stuff is obviously heavy, but it's more than just the weight. It's the weight distributed over a long area. An 8-foot piece of cherry may only weigh, well, let's see, a FAS piece of cherry, 6 inches wide by 8 feet long. That's going to be 4 board feet. 4 board feet of cherry is going to be around 12 pounds at about 3 pounds per board foot. It's a little less than that. So 12 pounds is not a big deal, but 12 pounds spread out over 8 feet long, and you've got weight distributed maybe 3 feet or 4 feet out in front of you, that's going to cause an imbalance, and it's going to cause you to strain your back a lot more. When you start adding pounds onto that, say picking up the same board in white oak, well, suddenly now that's going to be about 20 pounds. And the slight imbalance there can cause real problems, can cause you to lose control, cause you to drop the board, it's going to fall and whack you right in the shin, and that's how you get huge lumps on your shin that last for weeks on end. Trust me on this one. These are silly little things. They don't sound like much, and this will probably be forever named the Old Fogies Safety Podcast, because I'm talking about, oh, I hurt my back, oh, my eyes are bad, and I can't breathe, and I'm coughing and wheezing, and you know, make fun of it if you will, but these things are going to add up over time. Our working in the shop is never going to last as long as the furniture we build, we hope. But I sure hope that we can continue to enjoy the craft of woodworking well into our old age. So that's it for me for this safety day. Thanks guys for coming into the shop. We'll see you next time.
4 little girls tying their sash in the basement room that day, poking fun and making jokes for getting on their knees.